Thanks, Cassie, and hello everyone, and Craig Taylor jumping in there as well. Good to see you here, Craig. So yeah, today's webinar, as you can hopefully see, focusing on creating effective data strategy within your organisation, some tips getting started, some things to watch out for, and of course why you actually need one in the first place. So I'm Ian Blackburn, the head of analytics here at Thrive. And I'm also joined by Jolt Alar, who is the Senior Learning Technologist at Amazon. Jolt, if you want to just introduce yourself quickly.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I actually just joined this team, moved from AWS side of Amazon to this side, and 20 years in the industry, learning technology for the last 20 years, and instructional design, sort of the dancing between the two. And I'm happy to be here on a scale of 1 to 10. It's 11.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So I think those of you heard Cassie say we are going to have quite an interactive session today. So quite a few polls and questions going to be kicking off. Just to make sure everyone's comfortable using the chat, a nice classic to start with for everyone here today. So the question is, what is 42? So we'll let some people. Excellent. Great start there, Rosalind. That's like perfect. Got some 7
years ago.
Right. Nice. Excellent. So we have some fans in. That's perfect. So next one, just a quick poll. So what's your role? Just get a little bit of information about everyone here. Now we can't vote. Hopefully you can see the poll on the screen when the hangovers got worse. Goodness, mine are already pretty bad, so not looking forward to that.
So I can see results for the poll are coming in, guys. Most people, 44% L&D manager, team lead. We've got 35% other at the moment. People are still voting. We've got 10% content design and development. And I think that's it. I'm going to end and share it with you to have a look at the results.
Excellent, great. So it's got a really nice mix there. So just going to hand you over to Jolt now to pick up the start of the session.
So thank you so much for joining today. You see that data is not just about math and the spreadsheet things and everybody who thinks about like geeks. And you see that how the reason I'm enthusiastic about this whole topic is actually not the math part, but the human part. And I love the answers, some of the answers that you get for 42. Nobody said actually it's an even number or any of those like statistical things that I think, people with geeks would type in. And it just shows you how a piece of data like 42 doesn't have any meaning by itself without the context information to usable. And so one of the things that when I talk about data from L&D, they claim that this is not really their expertise because they're not data scientists, not engineers and analysts, and they're just simple focusing on the learning part. And apparently Accenture had a recent research on this, and 50% of the people in the workforce avoid data-driven tasks because they feel like they don't have the skills. At the same time, another report from Forrester shows that the technology, between the technology and the human culture, data-driven culture inside, the two against each other, those companies who are better on the culture, spreading out this basic data skills to everyone, they are the advantage. It's not about technology, it's about how people actually use data on a simple daily level. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to get out the definition here, so we don't worry about what we talk about when we talk about data strategy. And so I'm going to have you just read this alone because I think we all can read. But at the same time, I want you to focus on one word. So if you have to pick one word out of these things, the most important word, what would that be? And this is a great example of a bad instruction. So I counted 42 seconds. Actually, I waited until someone actually types in the chat. I never asked you to do this in the chat. I just said, pick one word. I didn't say type it in the chat. But apparently we don't follow instructions. So again, we have to be very clear when we do a strategy of why we're doing things and how we implement those. I loved actually the words mine is decision. So everybody had decision, kind of agree with me, but every word here is important because that's part of the definition. But at the same time, decision is one thing that I always say is a starting point. If you don't want to do anything with the data or what the result is, then why are you putting all these resources and energy into that, the whole project? So it always starts with the end, what you're trying to do. And then if there's no point of changing anything, there's no point of following up or do anything data-wise to make a decision, then why are we even getting there? And so if you go to the next slide, this is just kind of like a subset of the whole data strategy because we're talking about learning. And learning is kind of a, under the umbrella of people analytics and all the bigger things that your organization might be doing already. But maybe this part, the learning part, is not there yet on that scale. So on that level, if you move to the next slide, I just want to know generally today where you are, if not L&D, your larger organization on the data strategy scale. So you're going to see a poll here. And just want to know like where you are in the scale, starting from, hey, we're just thinking about it, to even figuring out how we start about data strategy, all the way to the advanced stage when you're like implementing, iterating, and moving forward.
So we're getting loads of votes come in, 44% early stages, 28% in the works. We've got 15% implementation stage, 9% analyst stage, and 10% advanced stage. I'll give it another few seconds to let a few more people vote, and then I'll end that and share the results with you all.
Nice. So we have a spread here that it looks like we're somewhere in the early stages and in the works. So if you add the top three together, that's probably the major part. And this was generally what it looks like industry-wise as well. Part of it is that when an organization starts hiring for this skill, data analytics, data engineering, sometimes they put them into a shared resource pile, somewhat isolated, and not thinking that these people are actually going to go down to the level of your everyday learning analytics. They probably deal with higher priorities. And again, that might be a strategy that works for high-level project, but could backfire, because what we need to do is we need to basically create a data literacy across the organization on basic skills, speaking, using, writing data. And you'll see that at Amazon, we use narratives. We write all the time. And data without a narrative without a data is basically just opinion. That's not going to go far. All right, so now we established where you are today. Let's move on to the next slide, because I want to illustrate why I'm actually excited about this topic. You might hear us talking about data-driven, evidence-based, or data informed. Those are the things that you might hear outside in blogs and conferences. For us here today, they all mean the same, that we start with data and we make decisions based on what we see, the insights coming from data. But I want to make sure that we all think when we approach this thing about not spreadsheets and numbers and Tableau or Excel sheets, but more about the human side of this thing. So every single number that we're working with and in your organization represents something, and that something, there's a story behind. There are humans, and there's consequences of all this decision making. So if we're right, or we assume something just by gut feeling, that actually affects people on the job. And I'm really driven by the fact that we can actually make our workforce life better if we're using data right. And so I want to illustrate this with a story. If you go to the next slide, this is a true story about David Fudgingham. He is stage 0, and in stage 0, he's living in this blissful oblivion. He's in high school. He's a good football player, quarterback, strong, young, and moves on with his life, goes to medical school, and again, like living his typical life. And then at some point, he gets to stage 1. Stage one is acknowledging the problem. Suddenly, what he feels is that he's getting less strong, less fast. He is lumped somehow in his body. He knows something's wrong, but he keeps going on and on and on, until one day in this stage one acknowledges that there's a problem. He walks in and checks in, and in 2 hours later, he's in the intensive care. And we would get to this in this stage is the next stage of this is the analysis. What happened? So he gets into the hospital near death. He recovers, and nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows why it happened. So he starts basically putting together all the numbers, creates a chart, and figures out, okay, this is what happened. Here's my analysis. That is basically the basic Tableau, LMS sort of thing that we can put together about our learning as well. So now he knows what happened, but he doesn't know why. He's very curious about it. He starts digging into, he doesn't get so far because he has another stage, and what ended up with is another near-death hospital experience. Now he's really into finding out what's happening, because obviously this is affecting his life, and nobody knows. And this is why the diagnostic analysis comes in. Finally, he's diagnosed with this rare disease called Castleman disease, and he gets 1 or 2 years most to live. And from there on, as a medical student, literally his goal is to find out what's causing this thing, why, and then maybe in the best case, how can he predict that? Because at least he can prepare for the next. At the same time, he wants to get married. And so now he has a goal, the date of his wedding. He wants to make it to the date of his wedding. And the next phase is digging into deeper, finding out who's working on this disease, isolated researchers all over the world. They do their great stuff. They publish, but they're on their own. They never talk to each other. So he connects the dots, creates this network around it, find out what is this disease, what do we know about it. And throughout this, he actually finds out that there is one little item, an immune system communication line that is a spike, and that predicts the actual intense problem that happened. So once you detect that, then you know that something's going to happen. This is what we call predictive analysis, because now you can run this analysis based on the chart, and you can predict, hey, this is coming, so you can prepare. But that's not going to help him with the wedding. What he wants to go is stage 5, and he'll make sure that if there is a cure, or there is any way to stop this spike, then that would be obviously the ideal results. And this is where we all want to be in the long run, prescriptive analysis. Not just tell what happened, why it happened, where are we going, or how it happened, but actually tell what to do to avoid it. So apparently, during this research, he finds out there is an FDA-approved drug absolutely unrelated to his problem, $30. So he drops all his medications, just buy this drug, $30, and he's still alive today. He's an associate professor here in Philadelphia. And he writes a book about this whole journey. And this is stage 6. How would he tell the story? His book is Chasing My Cure. I definitely suggest reading it. It's more dramatic than I explained here. But I looked at more around the data analytics stages perspective rather than his life. But the point is that we in L&D, we often follow the same pattern, but we stop at stage 2. We create a dashboard that tells what happened in the LMS, how many courses are completed. So if you think about this analogy, this multiplayer game sort of thing, when you end up and finding out and chasing the cure, it sounds like our SMEs and stakeholders come to us with Band-Aids. I need a Band-Aid. Here's what I put it, because that's all they know. That's the solution. The problem with that approach is that we stop at Band-Aids and we never chase the cure. So I think it's time for us now, for L&D, to stop counting the Band-Aids, and then let's start chasing the cure. So move to the next slide. It actually shows you what the life cycle of this looks like in a real data-driven project. It doesn't matter. There's no technology here. There's no process involved. There is no vendors. It is a generic process that every data-driven project will go through. And you can recognize some of David's kind of life cycle here. It starts with the number 1, which is the framing the problem. Sometimes it's reframing the problem. Many times asking the right questions actually help you upfront to get to the right place. And this is where stakeholders come in with decks and then say, hey, we need this course, 15 minutes, here's the content. In this case, whenever you have a data-driven project, it is always about finding what are we solving for, what is the business problem, going all the way backwards, who are the players in this game, so who can make that happen, how are they measured. Once you get that information together, magic. Sometimes the whole project drops because your stakeholders don't even know. Sometimes they think that they need a video for some reason, and then turns out like it's not going to solve their problem. So don't worry about the actual questions here and writing down, taking screenshots. It's in the handout. So you can take this, customize it, and use it on your own after. So that's the first part. Focusing on the problem, where are we going? If you go back to the slide, we're not flying that fast yet, Ian. There's 4 other places here. We're going to spend 1 and 2 in the webinar, 3 to 6, maybe in a different time. But once you identify the people in the game, second will be the collect raw data. How often, what sort of data, where is it coming from, how often we can update it, that sort of thing. Once you have the data in number 3, you clean it. It's never clean. It comes with like napkins and Excel sheets and who knows what. Then it gets into the number 4, exploration. This is where we build a dashboard, but these are dashboards called explanatory dashboards. It is for exploration. So you can find interesting things, then you can move on to stage 5. The problem to stopping here and then show this to an executive is that you're going to see a bunch of things on the screen, and the question is going to be, what am I looking at? That's not the point of analytics. Analytics comes in number 5 when you find those things, the correlations, interesting stories, and now you can do a deeper dive. And then the presentation, the last one is 6, is when you tell your hidden stories based on the audience to answer the question, what you had. So it's basically a circle. So you're going to go through this maybe in an hour, maybe in a day, maybe in a week, maybe years, depending on the complexity of your projects. But it's always the same sort of cycle. And so now we can go to the next one. I'm just wondering, in your case, where do you think L&D can contribute the most out of these 6 elements? So starting with the needs analysis, digging deep, what is the problem? Next is about collecting the data, finding how and on what we collect, what sort of data. 3 is cleaning. 4 is exploring the initial work, analyzing 5, and then presenting and telling the story 6. So you can just throw in a number in the chat. Where do you think L&D can contribute most? So definitely 1, because we're already doing this, or actually we're supposed to be doing this. Well, it says all 6, 1, 5, 6, 6. Yes, the storytelling end of it is definitely something we can do, or all of them. So it's pretty good. What I think the numbers are coming from is based on your organization again and culture. What it's important to do is understand the cycle so you can ask the right questions in every level, no matter where you come in. Sometimes L&D is brought in at the end or in the middle of the project. So you don't have the luxury of finding out who the right people are or what the data is. You're given some data and work with. But even then you can go deep, go back and ask those, how was this created? What's the scorecard? What does it mean on the scorecard there's a 6? Just because there's a 6 and you want a 10, I need to understand how it was collected, what does it mean, and what is the hidden story behind it, because otherwise you cannot solve things. So again, there's good methods to start. I think the simplest way to do that in learning is Kathy Moore's action mapping, but there are other, like Birkhoff and other ways to do analysis up front, but you have to start with their business, KPIs, the players in the game, and then start from there. If you skip that, your project's gonna go nowhere, that's for sure. So with that, now we know all this kind of detail elements and the cycle, but we talk about strategy here. Why in the world do we need a strategy when we already have these questions to ask and everything else? Ian, in your experience when you work with other customers, when and how the strategy comes in, and then what is the role of the strategy here?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, see the role really of the strategy is just to kind of connect everyone together. It's really very much the sort of, I guess, the glue that kind of brings everything together, make sure we can kind of continue executing on those problems. Bringing in the right skilled people from across the organization. We talked about having different stakeholders in play, and or the players in the game, as you nicely refer to it. It's important that kind of L&D doesn't do everything in isolation. You're trying to influence people around the business, and particularly key stakeholders that often get forgotten about in sort of top-down businesses, where and those key stakeholders are the learners. What do they care about? What's important to them? And how can we help influence those things? And obviously alongside that, we need to make sure that we've got effective processes in place and the tools. We talked about certain tools like a dashboarding platform, some way that we can visualize the data. You don't have to do it in any particular way, but you need to be able to have a method that you can see those hidden stories and be able to dive into them a bit further. So alongside a data strategy, in particular for L&D, there are, of course, people analytics is a separate topic altogether. HR kind of have their own way of looking at things that perhaps is separate to L&D or learning and development. I think Craig's called that out. So nice. And £10 tool from Jolt as well. I see that. Yeah, and no abbreviations. So yeah, but obviously with L&D, we should focus on the learning. That's what we're trying to measure here. Where can we find opportunities for learning? Against those business problems. Perhaps sometimes you have to derive a new KPI based on something else that's happened. You might have some business KPI that you can't see an opportunity for learning, but is there something else that can influence, and perhaps as a secondary piece of data? So, you might have a sales KPI, and you think, well, we can't necessarily influence that, but perhaps some of the feedback we found is that time management is an issue. Maybe there's an opportunity for improving time management skills, which might result in other business KPIs being improved because people have more time or feel more relaxed and able to do their job more effectively. So yeah, why do we need a data strategy? I sort of alluded to it a little bit. The key thing here is that we have a method for continuing to make improvements. We have something to prioritize. There are often lots and lots of ideas in play. Which are the ones that we can affect now. Sometimes there might be ideas that you have where you simply don't have the data available or the systems aren't in play. So it's not possible to realize those dreams and understand those data points. We talk about the project falling down. That's an easy one and I've seen personally a number of times where people sort of dump data into a platform of some sort and then want to just find answers to the questions that they had, but those questions were never framed at the beginning. So people can spend an awful lot of money buying tools and collecting data, and actually it's kind of worthless at the end if you haven't figured out what it is that you want to do from the very beginning. It also gives us the opportunity to kind of review where we're up to. Reviewing progress is really important. If we have that baseline set of metrics at the very start, we know, are the things that we're doing working? Is anything happening? Are we seeing any changes? Are there changes to behaviors that we're experiencing as a result of what we're doing? And we know that based on some metric that we're trying to test against. And I think it's really important we get into that mindset of experimentation. We should be looking to test and try different things, put controls in place where possible, so that you can validate against your own assumptions, and not just simply, deliver content and deliver training and just expect things to happen, and all of the answers to come to you. We have to try and plan to find these things out. So we have another quick poll here. We have the statement here. Oh, sorry, that's sort of come up on the screen. I don't think people can see that. So how much do you agree with the following statement? So learning analytics is a method of proving the training you're delivering is effective. So I'd like to hear some thoughts on this. Obviously, while Jolt's ordering everyone a bagel, addresses in the chat.
So where we are on the poll, 58% agree. We've got 21% disagree, 14% in the middle, neither agree or disagree, 3% strongly agree.
Interesting.
At the beginning is, I'm just going to let a few people more vote, but it's pretty much 60% agree. I'm just going to end that now and share the results with you all.
Let's have a look. Excellent. Okay, so 60% agree. So unfortunately, I don't agree with that. So I think for me, I think it's very easy for us to go, we're using learning analytics to prove something is effective. And I appreciate that perhaps some of the information in this webinar was misleading, sort of a little bit intentional. We have to be really careful that we don't set out to prove a specific thing. When you do that, you have, and Craig's pointed out in the chat, it causes incredible bias. Ultimately, if you want to prove something to happen, you probably can. You can move the data around, make it look a certain way, give the numbers and the data to stakeholders, and everyone go, well, great job. We've found something out here, and we've proved that this training has solved this particular problem. We really need to be looking to explore the data and let those, we talk about hidden stories, appear and understand, what they're telling us. Sometimes it is going to be things that you don't want to hear or the key stakeholders don't want to hear. And we have to accept that sometimes is the case, but it shouldn't be something that we're afraid of. We have to continue focusing on, our intent is to try and to change behaviors, is to try and see what does work and what doesn't, but not, so don't go and set a specific goal and base your entire project around simply proving a particular problem. Hopefully that makes sense. So yes, some good shouts there, and Craig's cheating a little bit, I think, because he and I talk about these things in the past. So that's something that is good, but been around a long time. So we're going to talk about where not to start here as well. So I think it's really easy, and I appreciate this is where we sometimes get hung out to dry by the marketing teams here. But before you do anything, before you go and spend a load of money and on a new tool or anything else, we go back to framing that problem. Make sure you understand what it is that you're trying to do. You might have an LMS or an LXP now. Talk to your vendor if you have an idea. Find out what's possible. What data points are available. Is the data available to answer these questions? Are you able to conduct tests that you want to try and to make these changes? And are you going to be able to explore that? The same with, I've done two, haven't I, here? Learning management system and learning experience platform. So that's $20 from me as well. But yeah, really thinking about, what it is that you're trying to achieve, and whether those tools can help you. That's another 1 hour. Yeah, I was going to say more than an hour, perhaps, there, I think, for the LMS and LXP. And I said, the really key thing is here just to make sure that the data is available. Again, I've seen it many times before, is that there's an assumption made that because you're using a platform that perhaps generates data, that you will, automatically be able to find the answers, and actually, 6 months, maybe longer down the line, turns out that those data points were never available, and that, you've almost wasted your time on a particular project, which of course pretty demoralizing for everyone. So really back over to Zsolt again now to take a look at what we were talking about earlier and look at sort of the first part and framing the problem.
Yes, thanks, Ian. So we know where not to start. And the reason why we brought in that question, whether it is about proving your effectiveness, is not that you're lying, actually, that you set out there and you're going to lie at the end. But when you prove something, your frame of mind, again, the number one, you're trying to answer a question, and the data you collect, the people you talk to, how you approach it is going to be in that frame. And that's going to be limited at the end. So meanwhile, if you really want to know what's happened, then you open that an exercise to more people, different data, and see what we really can get to. So it's just less about that we're actually intentionally want to lie. It's more about or limiting our thinking into one channel and then move on. And so where do we start? Framing the problem. Again, this is what we actually do now. We're supposed to be doing with stakeholders. So this is not something new. It's just a mind game. Again, this players of the game thing. It's changing the mind of your stakeholders, starting from not a solution, not a course, to what is the problem that we're solving for. And so if you go to the next slide, it actually starts with a little exercise. And this is, I suggest this exercise for every project that you have. You collect all your stakeholders. Sometimes you call this charter or whatever the methodology is, but let's figure out, just throw in the chat now, who are your key stakeholders in your currently, project process? So who are those either roles, either people, organizations, or departments that you work with, and you say, these are my stakeholders generally, and I need to get them involved in the project. So let's see what you do today. You have customers, learning delivery team to work with, definitely. Anybody else you're involving in your project? C-suite, yes, I definitely need some buy-in. Old employees, good luck with that. Store managers, regional managers, business HR, BPs. Learners, they often ask me for content creation, okay. IT team, leadership. So you see there's a lot of pieces around here, and depending on your industry and culture, you have very specific, obviously, and what the audience you serve. So that's a good start. Put them all in one paper, or today maybe use a digital version of that so you get a list. So now you have your stakeholders. I have a list here. If you go to the next one, it's a preliminary list of things on the left. Call them players. If you think about this like a multiplayer game, there's other players. So you want to make sure that you list all these people, but that's not enough. Next, what I suggest is kind of like the focus of these. So what are these people or organizations care about? Because as you go through this process, you're going to have to, one, cooperate. You have to ask, maybe they own data that you want to use. Maybe they're in this game because they want to get something out of it. So in order to bring all these people into one room, or just even on the same page, you have to prepare. And so this is kind of the focus. So for example, an ID, an L&D, an LXD, learning experience designers, instructional designers, they might care about maybe questions in the course that was part of this whole curriculum. Which question is harder that maybe slip and you have to revisit? An L&D team manager might think about the overall impact of the course curriculum on the job. Leadership, how do I show the value across the whole team in the long run? If you talk to IT, sometimes they say no to everything or give you a ticket to fill in because they own the security part of things. So once you collect these players, then you collect the focus. Then you can think about, okay, what do these people have? What sort of data they have? What motivation they might have to play with us? And what barriers they might put on? And once you have that charter thing, then you can approach them with little things that they might be interested in, rather than just saying, well, we need your time for an hour because we need your data. And in terms of which one is more important and which one is not, it is, again, based on your culture, but generally someone's going to write the check. So whoever writes the check, it's probably very important. But the information they need might be slightly different than, L&D leadership or an ID or business operations. The point is that you need to understand the players first, and then maybe you can do a RACI chart. And if you do any project management, you're familiar with RACI charts. It's basically a matrix of how do you want to communicate with all these people. So now, once you have this kind of chart, then you go to the next phase, and that is going to the next slide. That is what's missing here, and somebody already put in, I'm very happy about that learners are missing here. So the target audience is one of your stakeholders, and don't forget about them. Watch them working, talk to them, survey them, And you can see, I think, much better results at the end if you actually have the source. They might be interested in things that you don't think about. If it's a test or a quiz sort of thing, they might be interested in how they're doing against others. What is the baseline? What's their opinion about something? What's their confidence level against others? That sort of thing that you might have. So if you go to the next slide, we had in one identifying the people, identifying the data sources, sort of things, and stakeholders. Now it's about figuring out what to do to collect the data, how frequently, what sort of data you collect. And this is why usually, if you're not skilled and you haven't done this before in practice, you think about data as, I'm going to have a spreadsheet with numbers, and I need that from different places. So maybe copy pasting in Excel sort of thing. There's a lot of different data that you can think about in this case. So again, if you're not proving what you're trying to do, you can think outside of the box. So there is, if you go to the next slide, here's a bunch of, well, actually, this is, before we get to that next slide, what sort of data are you using today? Just wondering about from your LMS, from HR, whatever that you use today to make any decisions or creating a dashboard, that sort of thing. What data are you using today in learning analytics? Even if you don't analyze them, just like present them. Where's the data coming from? What sort of thing? So compliance, LMS talent reviews, surveys. So sometimes we send out surveys after the course, talent reviews, employee surveys, course completions. Most people do that, and compliance, and then list them, focus groups, quality check feedback, quality control feedback. All right, so there's a lot of things around, and obviously attendance starts with the attendance, because if you don't know who attended, you might not know who's been there. Appraisals, learner feedback. So most of the things are related very specifically about the learning part. And this is when, if you go to the next slide, if you expand this a little bit, and again, this is a decision and a culture, whether you're only concerned about what happens in the LMS as a learning organization, or you're also concerned about what's the impact on the workforce. If you do, then you need to think about slightly differently and open up. So you think about both quantitative and qualitative data. So this, what you expect most of the time, think about is like completions, time spent, attendance. There's all numbers, quantitative data. But you can also have surveys, discussions, groups, focus groups, and then you bring in the narratives under that explains those numbers better. You can have unstructured data. So imagine if you can tap into your Slack channel or your conversation throughout the course, the forum, and run a little bit of an analytics around how across the time, monitoring by that, jump in when you need to, because you seem like people are struggling just by the conversation they're having. So that's another data point. You can also have the actual KPIs, if you're lucky, bring together. And in that case, what you can do is compare the learning and the performance. Imagine a manager who has both of them while they're sharing together this with their employees, that you're absolutely great on flying colors, completing these courses, but yeah, you're struggling with the application. What do we do? That's a different conversation that's saying someone who just barely gets through the learning but is a good performer. Maybe it's just bored to death based on the training that they're getting. So again, performance data could be interesting, bring it in. And another part of this is understanding firsthand shadowing observations, because those are the things that you can actually measure 30, 60, 90 days out. This list is also in your handout, so you can take that, figuring out what you can and cannot use internally in this, and then build it in your work stream and create your data structure. Now, these are all available technically to use and have a great, rich data point. But Ian, in your experience with working real customers, there are restrictions and there are considerations that we have not talked about it yet when it comes down to data.
Yes, they absolutely are. I do want to just quickly answer a quick question we've had in the Q&A from Kevin. So how long should you be collecting raw data to make it credible? It's a really good question. And Joel, what's your take on that?
So this depends on the starting point of what you're trying to answer. What are those business questions that you're looking to answer? What are the KPIs? How often those KPIs change? And that kind of relates to how often you collect data and how often you go follow up with that. So if you think about a learning program or a learning course as an event, the things happens before, during, and after. So in a call center environment, for example, we start with a baseline before there's any interaction. And then during the event, which could take weeks or hours, depending on your courses. And then after that, 30, 90, 60 days is kind of like the standard out there. But again, it depends on your industry and how fast things change. What you don't want to do is measure something right after a course, and then you conclude that now they know what to do. And here's your presentation, because a week later, they might not even remember anything of what they learned, let alone actually doing the exercise on the job.
Yeah, so it's great. And yeah, I agree. I think, but the key thing there is that, that before, during, and after is really important. You need to know, what the world looks like now, before the changes, what's going on while you're trying to make the changes, and then does it stick? I suppose is the answer at the back of that. So just looping back through to what Joel asked me, I think we've got a ton of data here that you can collect. Lots of places to get data from. There'll be loads of places you can probably think of within your organization to collect data. But it's really, really important that you consider the ethics around the data, the local laws. We've all heard about GDPR. It's really important that you take a look at some of those things, what you can collect, what you should perhaps obfuscate. I've seen in my own experience, people try and collect data that is perhaps quite sensitive, and they haven't got a real, structured reason as to why you want to collect it. You have to really be mindful of that. Think about whether or not you'd be happy with that data being collected. Do you have the individual's best interests at heart here? We can talk about things like if you were looking at something related to gender, for example, then do you need to know on a larger scale, to see if your organization is diverse? Do you need to know the identities and the names attached to identities? You might want to get a snapshot of the diversity, but you don't necessarily need to know who those individuals are. You can give them anonymity in those scenarios. In another case, perhaps the way you store your data and who actually has access to it is really important, with that sensitive information. So really try and be mindful of all of these things. It's a really easy way to lose trust in any future experiments if you do things in a way that perhaps is questionable ethically. So a few more sort of do's and don'ts. Now, I won't go through all of these necessarily. You can see them on the screen. You have the pack afterwards, and everyone can read. The thing I really want to focus on here, though, is that don't be afraid to fail. You'll see that kind of towards the bottom. And I don't mean fail as in like try something and just say catastrophic failure here, but sometimes you might try something and it makes no difference. Perhaps things get worse according to the data, over time, or perhaps the feedback isn't good. And that's absolutely okay. We have to be mindful that sometimes, things just don't happen as we expect them to. And that shouldn't be something that instills fear that perhaps our budgets will be cut or that we won't be able to have the budget available for L&D, because key stakeholders might turn around and say, well, this is useless, we're not doing anything anymore. And we have to get in the mindset of that this hasn't worked, so we know that we won't do that anymore, and we'll try something else. We'll try a new experiment, we'll try and collect the feedback, learn about your users, understand those behaviors, what they did like, perhaps elements of it, what didn't work, refactor those things, try something different, and again, that continued evolution towards trying to solve the problem that you set out at the beginning. So one more quick sort of question for me. So any lessons that you've kind of learned from your experiences, both in L&D and perhaps if you have particular experiences working with learning analytics specifically, it'd be great to hear any of those things. Yeah, interesting for sure. Yeah, generally if stakeholders like to see they accept it. Otherwise, question. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the I think Jordan Merritt has a book on this, and he's kind of the godfather of data literacy. And what I like about his podcast is saying like literally culture eats like not just everything for breakfast, but your data and presentation as well. And this is where sometimes you think naively that just because you present something, there's going to be changes. You really have to know, again, the players in the game of how they think, what are their values, and how do you change them. It's a negotiation game, and never ever go to a meeting to present some kind of extraordinary chart and surprise everyone on that meeting, because you're going to get like backfires all over. So find the key players, show them before, hey, this is what we're seeing. What do you think? And even if they disagree, they have prepared, and don't do that in a meeting. They usually don't go well.
Some good responses. Don't produce lots of data that's meaningless. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, meaningless data is the killer of all things in learning analytics.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially that it ends up with drowning in data and you don't see those little gems, the hidden stories, because there's just so much going on and basically unrelatable, and nobody wants to go through that trash. Again, the cleaning part, usually nobody wants to take. I think it was number 3.
Nice. And yet preparing learners for outcomes of their learning, helping them understand the purpose of self-directed learning online. Yeah, for sure. All right, good. So yeah, one little thing, I guess for me, I'd say this is not only the single slide on the plug here, just a little bit about Thrive specifically. Something that we're trying to do here is the data lab, and it's really the reason we're talking about data strategy today is that's really what our focus is. It's trying to provide a supporting role here alongside the LXP that we have at Thrive to help you develop and continually improve your data strategy, help you provide and understand those stories that exist within the data, and work alongside your teams to find out who those players in the game are, connect them together, and make sure that we know who what people care about, what's important to them, and make sure that we're understanding the problem that we actually need to try and solve in the organization. So that's kind of all from me. Sort of one more, I think, from Jolt as well.
Before I jump to this, a couple of things about data collection. Sometimes your stakeholders or SMEs say like, well, I don't want to collect anything. All I want is just this in the LMS so I can check them. And that's, if that is what they want, and really that's what they need, that's fine. What the problem is sometimes that they don't know what they're to ask for, because that's what all they've seen before, that when there's a need, we put an LMS course up there or LXP, and then now you're done. And so this is where the conversation sometimes takes a slightly different approach with your needs assessment, asking about how do you and what do you be accountable? What are you being accountable for this? Is there some kind of an initiative that it's part of? Oh yeah, this is because XYZ. It's part of the XYZ thing. So tell me about the XYZ thing. What are you trying to achieve through this ask? So you can start shifting their mind. Again, it's a mind game. From I want a course through what is the actual problem that they're trying to solve for, and then help them to get to the data. Now, sometimes an example, if you're working with, at an example in a call center, when managers needed, or actually they asked us to have a coaching training because they're not coaching well. And so there was an off-the-shelf coaching training, it could be half a day, put everything on it, probably $500,000 to all through the country. So instead of starting with that, we started asking the right questions around, okay, how do you know that this is a problem? How do you measure that? And what it turns out is that, yeah, they do actually know how to coach. It's just they don't have time to coach. And the reason why they don't have time to coach is because they have to answer all these questions to new hires when they get on the floor. So now we have a data point. It's not really measured. It's not on their scorecard, but there's an assumption that we can make together that if we reduce the questions, the unnecessary questions that managers are getting, then they would have more time to coach and then see what happens. So let's not put them through a whole coaching session and may not solve anything. Let's figure out how we actually reduce the questions. And this is what reframing the question and answer is. So about this whole game, we talk about things like what if it's a game, multiplayer game, and all that. It's just, I think, more fun and interesting to think about data rather than just here's the things to do. And so one thing that makes the narrative interesting, obviously, is surprise. And so I know it's a cheesy slide, but what is surprise? So if you really just think about dryly on data and you collect what you know you can collect, then you end up with data that you were thinking. And if you don't find anything surprising in your data, then you did probably something wrong. So one way to do that is an example. We had a course when we have pre and post test, and what we had thought about or trying to figure out is there an attitude that has effect on how people go through the course? So basically, how impatient people are as they're getting through that, and whether impatience has any effect on their performance. And so there's no way to measure impatience, like there's no metrics on that. So what we did was we actually added one more question in the pre-quiz, and it was about their feeling. And it was as a scale, asking on a scale of 1 to 5, how long it felt to get through this pre-quiz. And so we got the data from there. Then we compared it to the real time that they actually went through because they had that data. And then we compared that to the average from the cohort and the group. So all these three together basically gave us a map of how impatient these people were, because some of them said like it was absolutely the longest thing they had to do, and yet they was in the first quarter of completion. So we knew that it was really felt long for them, and yet it wasn't. And so the question was, once we established this like impatient status or attitude, let's look at the pre and post and how they go through the course, and is there any correlation? And the answer or the action inside could be is that maybe we designed a course slightly differently if we know how impatient they are. Maybe the content is more conversational, like I'm talking to an expert here. It's more like a psychological thing rather than actual different content. But maybe there is some correlation around it. So that's something that you throw in this one question, and you may or may not find any correlation, which again may not be causation, but at least you have something interesting to look into. And again, so if you don't put anything in that might surprise you, then at the end, you're not going to be surprised. That's for sure.
I love that. Really good. We've got another question here as well, I think from Tina. So any tips on data that's not necessarily comparable as it covers different populations where you need to make sense?
So there is, I don't know exactly what the comparable means, whether it's the actual data structure is not comparable or what the collect information is not comparable. But I think there is a limit for everyone who's not a data engineer, scientist, or statistician around what you can do with data. And this is where this basic data literacy that we all should have comes into play. So sometimes you work with data scientists, sometimes you work with a statistician, a psychometrician, if it's a test, for example. There are established ways of approaching testing, for example, to make sure that your 80%, which we just put out there sometimes, like a random number, that is coming from nowhere. It's just our industry myth that every test should be 80%. So that's one thing that you can work with them of, if this is the specific data set, how do you approach that? There's statistical ways to tell what is the likelihood that someone gets through by guessing. You can ask them to, if you collect data and it's a sample, what's the sample size that should be? So you don't have to know all of that. What you have to know is understand what your questions should be, so you can sit down with these people and say, hey, here's my concern, or here's my question. Tell me how to do that so I can move on. If you don't ask the right questions, they're not going to know. And so this is where, again, like as long as we are skilled to ask the right questions and understand the cycle, then we can talk and ask those questions from like professionals.
Excellent. So a couple of questions on the Q&A. For the first one, so what metrics should L&D care about most?
So we call, there's I think two types of metrics. One is the vanity metrics that you probably already have. These are crazy things that we made up. So things like time spent in training divided by full-time staff. And so in theory, it gives you the number of how much value you created in the organization per person. Now, if I'm a business stakeholder and I see that, for me, what it looks like is, what it says is that I made people invest their time in something, and it cost me, based on what I see, let's say 2 million. So my question would be, I understand this, where's the result? Is it worth it or not? Rather than saying, great job, you took people off the work, 140 hours. That's an excellent way. So those metrics, again, it looks good on charts, but as a business, probably not really usable. Where I would love to move forward is more around what happens on the job that actually your stakeholders care about, the scorecard. If it's an agent and they have a scorecard and they care about customer service, quality, and handle time, whatever those things are, then focus on those. You might not be able to say this training moved this scorecard here, but you can set a correlation between, and you do A/B testing. And A/B testing means that maybe you have two groups and one goes through the training that you design, the others don't. And then you compare their results 30, 60, 90 days out and show, like, if you're using this method that I suggested, here's the result on the job. So whatever that performance metrics are, that would be my preference. And if not, then going back from there, some sort of a pseudo, what we call proxy elements, that you came up with something that you think it's in between their performance goals and learning, because you don't just want to measure knowledge.
Nice, thanks. And there's another one who go, any tips to analyze qualitative data? Quite a broad question there, perhaps, but any particular experiences around qualitative analysis that you've done, Joel, that you want to share?
So yeah, this is not my expertise. Actually, my wife is at ETS, and she is a research scientist in qualitative data. So I would not venture in that realm. But the basic things that we do is collect the quantitative data and use the quantitative data as a starting point. So you can see like those exploratory charts. And when you see interesting things, then you can start looking at, for example, surveys, looking at chat results, sentiment, what people ask on their internal knowledge board, and then compare that to and correlate to the numbers. So you look at, for example, what are the topics that come up right now on their, let's say you have an internal knowledge base. And instead of waiting until someone says, a stakeholder, that we need training on X, you can have a feed actually going in and analyzing what are the hot topics that you might come up in the next month because they're asking about it. There's always something going on before it happens to be a training problem. So if you can catch those, sometimes it's not a real structured data. Sometimes it's just like snippets. So again, the narrative can be used to underlying to see the numbers. But other than that, that's how far I got with that type of data.
Okay, so we are just about out of time. If there's any more final questions that people want to ask them now. If not, of course, do feel free to follow up with the team here at Five and reach out. And if you want to talk to us more about Data Lab, then we'll be happy to dive a bit deeper into that with you. So I think that's all certainly from me and from Joel. So just want to thank everyone who's attended today. Appreciate all the questions, really interactive group. So where can I find this presentation after? Cassie, that might be one for you, how that's getting sent to people.
I'm here, I'm back. You can find this presentation after in your inbox. So after this session in the next few days, we will be sending out a copy of the recording, a copy of the slides, and again posting the handouts to all of you. I'm just going to put that in the chat as well for anyone that might have missed it earlier. So I'm just reposting the handout. So thank you for all of your thanks. Zolt has done a connect with me on LinkedIn. Yes, please do. I was going to do a little LinkedIn plug for you both as well. You can also find Ian on LinkedIn. And of course, if you are not following Thrive yet, you will want to. I can promise you that. I can put my camera on as well. Here we're back. So yes, please do follow Thrive, and we will be sharing all of our upcoming events. So I just wanted to, whilst we've got you, share what we have upcoming. So our next live session will be on the 7th of October, where we're bringing together more L&D experts from the likes of Moonpig, Ted Baker and Decium, and we're going to be hosting our first LinkedIn Live panel event, and we're going to be talking all things women in learning. So if you're not already signed up to that, please join us. I'll put the links in the chat after this, and that is on the 7th of October. And then the next webinar after that is going to be on the 21st of October, and that's going to be all about new ways to support wellbeing and human learning. And we're teaming up with mental health charity Run for Your Minds to host that one as well. So yeah, the only last thing to say is thank you so much, Zolt, for joining us today. Thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. Loving the dance moves, Zolt. And if you guys want a part 2, be sure to tag us in LinkedIn, and if we get enough requests, we'll host a part 2 where we will share steps 3, 4, maybe 5 and 6, or maybe that's a part 3. Who knows? The world is our oyster.
Thanks everyone, and yeah, maybe over bagels. Yeah, absolutely, more chats over bagels. Yeah, like I said, new podcast upcoming. And for like message from Joel, if you didn't see it, let's stop counting the band-aids and let's start chasing the cure. I think that's a great message to end the webinar with today.
Awesome. Part 2 gets my vote. Great. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Zolt.
Thanks everyone.
See you all soon.